Okay, this is part 4 of my video series on Abraham, the man who inspired God. Okay, part 3 we left off where Abraham had rescued Lot and many other people, including the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, and he returned all the people, all the gold, the silver, all their livestock, all the victuals of war back to the king of Sodom. He didn't take anything but a little food for his men to keep them, to keep them going during war. But so he was a righteous man. He didn't. He wasn't like the other men of the world after the flood that would fight and take other people's possessions and war after, take women and their livestock and this and that. Abraham was a different person. He was living with a consciousness towards God. Do you understand? He was a righteous man. Do you understand? He returned everything to him. Anyway, so chapter 15, we pick up the story here. This in verse 1, it says, "After these things, the word of the Lord came unto Abram." He still hadn't got his name changed. He still wasn't born again into the kingdom of God quite yet, okay? In a vision, saying, "Fear not, Abram, I am thy shield and thy exceeding great reward." Okay? Now, pick up on the fact that the great reward isn't going to be anything of material possession or anything physical. Do you understand? It's going to be spiritual things, and there's nothing greater than children or descendants of family, because they're great sources of what? Love. But you have to remember now that your true reward comes in the afterlife too. Do you understand? It just does not end in this life. Do you understand? There's more to this life than this life. Do you understand? You'll be rewarded in the afterlife. Do you understand? So when God says, to Abram, "I am thy shield and thy exceeding great reward," do you understand? He's talking about for eternity too. Do you understand? He's just not talking. Some people might just think that it's just in this lifetime. It's after this lifetime too, for all eternity. Do you understand? And what laid ahead for Abram once he was born again into the kingdom of God is something that is probably beyond explanation, beyond description. It's certainly not in the Bible. In other words, Abraham is still alive to this very day. Do you understand? Whatever his reward is for being a faithful man right after the great flood, do you understand? And being faithful to God is beyond our understanding. But there certainly is a reward for you, too, if you are a faithful servant of God. If you have become a faithful servant of Jesus Christ, laid up for you is a reward, too. Do you understand? For everything. Do you understand? From giving, from being hospitable to strangers, to giving someone a glass of water. Do you understand? To being kind to people. Anything from what you would consider large or small. Do you understand? Your reward is just not in this life. It goes past this life. Do you understand? Anyway, getting back to the chapter 15 here in Genesis chapter 15, he went on to say that, Abram wanted, he was concerned about an heir, who was going to be his heir after he left this life, after he died, because he did not have a child. Okay, so he said, "Lord God, what wilt thou give me, seeing I go childless?" And don't forget that Abram, he already had a lot of wealth. He had gold and silver and a lot of livestock. He had a lot of material possessions, do you understand? But he lacked the one thing he wanted, and that was his own son, his own children, do you understand? His own son, really, to carry on his name, to carry on who he was, do you understand? Most men want that. They want a son to carry on who they are, do you understand? And that's what the one thing he was lacking. He already had material possessions. He could have accumulated a lot of possessions by taking the spoils of war. He was certainly entitled to them because he risked his life. He risked the lives of the men that were in his household, the 318 men. He risked their lives to rescue others. He was certainly entitled to the spoils of war, but he didn't take them. He was a righteous man. Do you understand? Like a lot of us, there's, we want more than this world has to offer. What you really want is not material possessions. What you want are spiritual things, peace, love. Do you understand? Joy. And certainly this world doesn't offer those things. Those things only come from God. Do you understand? You can't get those things in this world. Anyway, verse 2, and Abram said, Lord God, what wilt thou give me, seeing I go childless? See? You understand? Remember, Sarai is barren. She is unable to have children. And the steward of my house is Elzer of Damascus. And Abram said, Behold, to me thou hast given no seed, and lo, one born in my house is my heir. He had one person that was born amongst his household. So he thought, is this my heir? Is this who I'm going to leave my estate to? And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, This shall not be thy heir. This person is not going to be your heir. But he that shall come forth out of thy own bowels shall be thy heir. You're going to have your own son. Do you understand? And he brought him forth abroad, saying, Look now towards heaven. Tell the stars, if thou be able to number them. And he said unto him, So shall thy seed be. In other words, you're going to have a lot of descendants. You're going to have not only children, you're going to have grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren. You're going to have so many descendants that are going to come out of you, you won't be able to count them. Do you understand? And what did he do? Verse 6. And he believed in the Lord. And what is the rest of that verse? And it was counted it to him for righteousness. Now you can't just gloss over this verse, see? You can't just keep reading. Listen to what it says. And he believed in the Lord. Now I got to tell you, this is my opinion, okay? I'm gonna tell you, it's my strong opinion that he wouldn't have gotten those descendants if he didn't believe in the Lord. He wouldn't have gotten them. Without faith, you'll get nothing from God, is what I'm saying. What did we say that faith is? Faith is the substance of things hoped for, is the evidence of things not seen. Do you understand? Who was hoping? Both God and Abram were both hoping. Do you understand? God couldn't do anything unless Abram had faith, and certainly God wasn't going to do anything without him having faith in him. Do you understand? Faith is a very fragile thing. Do you understand? It's a very delicate thing. Do you understand? Faith can be destroyed very easily. Do you understand it? It's like delicate china. Do you understand it? It could be a very fragile thing. If you read some of the stories about what Jesus did, the miracles he performed, some of them he could not perform because of people's unbelief. If you look in Matthew, the 13th chapter, in the verses 55 through 58, you'll find out that he was unable to perform any miracles because of people's unbelief. It says in verse 58, and he did not many mighty works because of their unbelief. He was limited to what he could do because of their unbelief. Okay? And if you also look in Mark, the 6th chapter, the 5th verse and 6th verse, it says, and he could do there no mighty work. He could perform no mighty miracles. Do you understand? Except that he laid hands upon a few sick people. Okay? He couldn't do any mighty things. and he healed a few sick people. Do you understand? That's all he could do. Verse 6 said, and he marveled because of their unbelief. Do you understand? So without faith, it limits what God could do. It limited what Jesus could do. Do you understand? Faith is a very delicate thing. Do you understand? So what did he do? He couldn't do anything because of their unbelief. So he went around the villages teaching. So instead of healing people and performing miracles and this and that, he resorted back to teaching. Because why? Because teaching builds up faith. Do you understand? So he went back to the wisest thing he could do, and that was to resort back to teaching, because teaching builds up faith. Okay, so it was the wisest thing he could do. He's the wisest rabbi ever. I mean, he's the wisest teacher ever. You know, the wisest Jewish Messiah. I mean, he had so much wisdom, but he was limited to the amount of things that he could do. His power was limited by the amount of faith that people had. You have to understand that. As we go along here, you're going to find out that Abraham is the beginning of many, many things. Do you understand? He's the beginning of the chosen people. Without Abraham, there may not have been a chosen people. Do you understand? Without him reaching out to God with faith and making a connection with God by simply believing what God told him, there may not have been the chosen people. By reaching out with God when he was tested by God with his son Isaac, there may have never been Jesus Christ, the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. I can't answer those questions. Do you understand? But there was a beginning to all of this, and it began with Abraham. Do you understand? That's why he became the friend of God. And he reached out to God with faith. Now I'm going to give you a few examples in a few great stories in the Bible about two different people that had a little bit of faith, and how a little bit of faith goes a long ways. If you read in Mark, the 5th chapter, we're going to pick up the story here. It's right after Jesus cast out some unclean spirits of a very tormented man that lived amongst the tombs in an area very close to the Sea of Galilee. Now, I've been to this area back in 1998. I visited Israel, and I've been to this area where this took place. I've been to many of the areas around the Sea of Galilee. I've been to Capernaum, where Mary, the prostitute Mary, lived. She had 6 unclean spirits cast out of her. This man had a legion of unclean spirits. They wanted Jesus to let them go into a herd of pigs, swine, and Jesus let them do it. Now, we're going to do another video sometime in the future about how unclean spirits apparently can go into unclean animals. Don't forget that in some of my videos I've taught that animals are given a nephesh. That's a Hebrew word for living soul or essence of life. Do you understand? And so are people. We share that, a nephesh. But people are also given, human beings are given something animals are not, and that's called a neshama. That's a Hebrew word for a divine higher part of you, a divine spark, a divine inspiration. And you can develop a higher soul, a much pure soul, a divine soul. And if you look at some of my other teachings, I explain how that happens by the choices you make in life. Do you understand? Nevertheless, Jesus came from this area where he cast out the legion of demons, and they went into the swine. The swine went down the hill into the Sea of Galilee, and they were killed. And we'll do a video series about how unclean spirits can drive people to want to kill themselves, suicide, and they torment people. That's for another lesson. Anyway, so he has a crowd of people that are following him around. Do you understand? And in that crowd is a man named Jairus. And we pick up the story here in verse 22, and it says, And behold, there come one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name. And when he saw him, he fell at his feet. So this ruler of the synagogue, Jairus, fell at Jesus' feet. I assume he had been following him around. He had heard of Jesus. But keep in mind, this was a very risky thing for a ruler of a synagogue to do. Most of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the rulers of the Jews, did not like Jesus. They did not believe he was the Messiah. They were against him. There was a conspiracy to get rid of him, starting to formulate. Do you understand? To get rid of him. Do you understand? Because he was starting to gain a following. Do you understand? But this poor man had a problem. He had a dying daughter. She was 12 years old. So use your imagination out of whatever it was, sheer desperation. I'm sure at first, I'm sure he was at his, he didn't know what else to do. He started following Jesus. Keep in mind, because he was a ruler of a synagogue, he had to be well versed in the Torah and the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, which is the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. The book of Moses, the book of the prophets. It's basically the Old Testament. I'm sure he was well versed in it, and I'm sure he was looking for the Messiah himself. Do you understand? So could it be that this was the Messiah? The Bible doesn't really explain what he believed. All we know is he was a ruler of a synagogue, so he was well educated in the Torah, the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, and he was in a desperation because he had a dying 12-year-old daughter, and he had been following Jesus around. And he surely witnessed some of the miracles that Jesus performed. He had to, because in this next verse he says, and he besought him greatly, saying, my little daughter is lying at the point of death. I pray thee, come and lay hands on her, and that she may be healed, and she shall live. Now, Jesus had laid hands on other people, and they had recovered from whatever was ailing them. And I'm sure this man had witnessed that Jesus had laid his hands on people, and they recovered from whatever was ailing them. So he laid down the parameters of what he believed could take place. If you were just to touch her, lay your hands on her, she shall recover. He had seen this before, obviously. Okay? So, and he was putting his life at risk by other Jews, other religious Jews. If they had saw him following Jesus around, he would have been ostracized and he could have been killed. Do you understand? He could have had his life ended. Do you understand? By following Jesus. Anybody had a dying daughter. Think of the predicament that he was in. Do you understand? And Jesus went with him, and much people followed and thronged amongst him, a big mob, a crowd of people. Now think, amongst them people, there were people that may have started to believe that Jesus might be the Messiah. There were people that did not believe. They just wanted to see what was going on. Who was this person? Some that just mocked him, made fun of him, people that just thought he was just some crackpot, somebody that was just full of the devil, do you understand? Somebody that was a lunatic, do you understand? And then there was some 3 disciples that were with him too. Anyway, in that crowd, it says in verse 25, a certain woman, a Jewish woman, which had an issue of blood for 12 years, was in that crowd. She had suffered many things from many physicians. She had spent all that she had and gotten, she had not gotten better, but rather it got worse. And when she heard of Jesus, was coming, she came in and pressed behind them, you understand, and touched his garment. She just touched his garment. For she said within herself, if I may touch his clothes, I shall be whole. This is her miracle. This is her blessing. She laid down the parameters of the blessing that she was going to get, the miracle that she wanted. She's the one that laid down the parameters. She's the one that said, if I touch his garment, I shall be made whole. And she had faith that Jesus was who he was. Do you understand? And then she touched his garment, and lo and behold, it happened. The connection was made. Her faith with who Jesus is, God, the Son of God, the connection was made, and she got her miracle. And it says, and straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt it within her body, and she was healed of the plague. She felt her own healing, which had to be really some kind of an experience to feel yourself being healed. Do you understand? It's nothing that she went home and checked later and thought, oh, something happened. She felt it instantaneously right there, and she knew it. How she did, the Bible doesn't explain. All it says is she felt it in her body. She knew it. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned him about in the press and said, who touched my clothes? Okay, and the disciple said to him, thou seest the multitude thronging thee, and says, who touched you? In other words, there's plenty of people that were pressing in on him. Everybody was touching him. It was a crowd. They were pushing each other. And you say, who's touching you? Everybody's touching you. And he knew by asking that exactly the woman would know what she was talking about, what he was talking about. He wanted to make a spectacle of her for good reasons. And we're going to explain that in a minute. Do you understand? So he turned around and said, who touched me? And virtue had gone out of him. Life, not just life, virtue. She had a virtue, and that virtue was to be made whole and be healed. And when she touched his garment, virtue went out of him. Because why? Because he's the source of life. Jesus is the way, the truth, and what? The life. He's the life force. God is the life force. Do you understand? The Son of God is the life force. So virtue went out of him. Do you understand? And she got what she wanted with her faith. And it says he looked round about to see her, that she had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, she was shaking, fearing, nervous, knowing that what was done in her, came and fell down before him. And what does it say? And told him all the truth. She gave a great testimony, was nervous and trembling, and told the truth. She was a Jewish woman, you understand? And then the Jews had been taught the 10 Commandments from Moses, the Torah. Do you understand that thou shalt not bear a false witness? She had a lot of pressure on her to give a true testimony because it was in their 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not bear a false witness. You understand? They lived within a society that had very strict rules, the Torah, the 613 different commandments. Do you understand? And the 10 Commandments. Do you understand? She was a Jewish woman. Do you understand? And she gave a very honest testimony in front of the crowd. Do you understand? And what do you suppose that did to one particular man in that crowd? Jairus. Her testimony helped build up his faith before they got to his house. So that beautiful testimony actually helped build up his faith before they arrived to his home to see about his daughter. It had to help him. It really did. Do you understand? Anyway, in verse 34 it said, and he said to her, daughter, thy faith has made thee whole. Your faith has made you whole. Go in peace. Be whole of thy plague. But, what do we read next? Verse 35. While yet he spoke, there came from the ruler of the synagogue's home a certain person which said, thy daughter is dead. It's too late. Your daughter just died. She expired. She passed away. He said that to the ruler Jairus, but Jesus heard them speaking, see. Thy daughter is dead. Why trouble the master any further? Why trouble Jesus anymore? She's dead. It's too late. Let's go. You need to go home and take care of burying your daughter. She's dead. Verse 36, as soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he said to the ruler of the synagogue, what did he say? Be not afraid, only believe. Could you imagine that? Your daughter died, and Jesus says, be not afraid, only believe. That's an amazing moment. Do you understand? Could you imagine that? It's unbelievable. You understand? As soon as Jesus, here he just heard this testimony from this woman who just got healed right in front of him. But it's not a healing that you could see with your eyes. So he's listening to her intently, watching her tell the truth about all that happened. This is not a miracle that you could see, like an ear getting reattached. Do you understand? It's something you cannot see. So he has to judge her like we all judge people, whether she's telling the truth or lying. Do you understand? And the Bible says she told all the truth. Do you understand? Anyway, it says that as soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he had told Jairus, be not afraid, only believe. After that, he says, verse 37, he said, and he suffered no man to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, 3 disciples. And he told the crowd, don't follow me to his home. We're done. Anyway, he came to the home of the ruler of the synagogue and sees the commotion going on, and everybody's weeping and wailing greatly. She just died. Everybody's upset and crying. Do you understand? And when he came in, he said unto them, why make all this ado? What's with all this crying? And why did Jesus say that? That was an unusual thing to say. That's a natural thing for everybody to be sad and upset, isn't it? Why did he say that? He said it on purpose. Why make a bunch of ado about all this? He wanted to see who had faith and who didn't. And you're going to find out that that's true by what he did next. Why make a big deal about all this? And weep. The damsel's not dead, but she sleeps. And they laughed him to scorn. Okay? So what did he do next? To the ones that all laughed, he said, get out. Out. Get out of the house. It says in verse 40, but when he had put them all out, he took the father and mother of the damsel. And what did I tell you earlier? Jesus cannot do anything. He's limited to what he can do by the atmosphere that he's in. He can do very little in the atmosphere of doubt. Very little. He could do nothing without faith. Without the Father's faith, he could have never made her come back. Do you understand? This would have never happened. You have to understand this. He couldn't have done it with just his power. You have to understand, there's a lot of people think that Jesus did this. Listen to what it says. Okay? They all laughed him to scorn. He wanted to see if anybody in the crowd had any faith, because if the ones that didn't laugh and thought he could do it, they would have stayed in the house. That was a test. They all laughed, so he said, get out. Because that's an unusual thing to say. Jesus knows it's a normal thing to cry after someone dies. He said it on purpose. He wanted to see. He wanted to separate those who had no faith to those who did. And he separated them. They all laughed, so he told them, all of you get out. Anyway, he took the father who had faith, because the father did have faith. He just saw a great testimony on the way home. And he just had Jesus told him, be not afraid, only believe. They went into the room where the damsel, the daughter, was dead, and they were with them, and the 3 disciples went in there because they had faith, and they entered in where she was lying, and he took the damsel by hand, and he told her, Talitha cumi, which is interpreted, damsel, I say to you, arise. Okay? And if you look at verse 42, and straightway the damsel arose and walked, for she was the age of 12 years, and they were astonished with great astonishment. Could you imagine? I don't think You really can. I think you can read it as a story in the Bible, and we have a hard time. She was literally dead, not breathing, dead. She may have been changing colors too. I couldn't imagine myself, because you can read it in a book, but the reality of being there, you understand, she was literally dead. For how long, I have no clue. Could have been quite a while. She could have been turning gray. Do you understand? And then all of a sudden, she's getting up and she's back alive. That's beyond my comprehension. Anyway, and he charged them straitly that no man should know it, and commanded that she should have something to eat. Now, it's my guess that he charged them that no one should know about it because of a lot of different reasons. I would be guessing. The Bible doesn't make it clear. I assume there would be a lot of people that want their relatives being brought from the dead. A lot of people would want him to come to graves where people have been dead for a couple of years. It would be a lot of different reasons why he wouldn't want them to do this, to tell anybody, because then they would think that he would just go to someone's, a child that died 3 years ago, to a grave to bring him back. It would stir up too much emotions, too much confusion, too much commotion, too many problems. She had just died just a few minutes before they got to their house, and Jesus had met this man just prior to getting to the house. This was done within minutes, really. And I can't speak for God. I cannot speak for Jesus as to why he brought her back from the dead and why this. But I could tell you one thing. The father, had enough faith to believe that he was going to do it. I could tell you that, because without that, it would have never happened. Do you understand? Just as I said from the onset, that there may have not been a chosen people, the Jewish people, without Abraham believing in God, that he was going to do what he was going to do. Abraham, it says, believed what God said, and it was counted to him for righteousness. You understand? So I've given you a few examples of the people. You need faith to make that connection with God. God has hope. Do you understand? He has hope. He had hope that Abraham was going to believe what he told him. There was no guarantee that Abram was going to believe what he said. But he did believe in his heart that everything he said, and the connection was made. So here's how you're richly blessed by Abraham. It's one of the greatest ways that you're blessed. John 3:16 says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life." Whosoever believeth in him, whoever has faith in him, shall not perish, but have everlasting life. Do you understand? Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8 says, "For by grace are you saved through faith, that it's not of yourself, it is a gift of God." But it takes faith. Do you understand? So how do you put that together with Abraham? The promises that God made to Abraham are ones that you can see to this very day with your own eyes. Because why? God promised Abraham that he would have millions and millions of descendants, so many he couldn't count them. The two examples, the man Jairus and his young daughter who came back from life, there was only a few people in the house, 3 disciples and Jesus, and they were told never to tell anyone. Do you understand? They're gone in human history. They're not here in this day to tell you their testimony. Like I said, the woman that had an issue of blood, she's not here to give her testimony to you. They're a part of history. And what is history? His story. They're a part of God's story already. Do you understand? Almost 2,000 years ago. Abraham was almost 4,000 years ago. And he's the only one in the Bible that God gave these promises to To this very day, you could see that they're still coming true. Why? Because you could see that there's a land of Israel. It exists to this very day, and they're still the Jewish people. They're still having babies. They're still multiplying. So you can plainly see that God has kept his word with Abraham. He made those promises almost 4,000 years ago. This is a promise, a miracle, a blessing, a covenant that you can clearly see with your own investigation, your own eyes, that God kept his word. And if God keeps his word by having a little bit of faith, the same faith that Abraham had, he'll keep his word when he said he'll save you. Jesus Christ will save you if you have a little bit of faith in him. Do you understand why you're blessed now? Because you can see that God kept his word with Abraham, because Abraham had a little faith in him. Do you understand? So God will keep his word by saving you if you believe in Jesus Christ. Do you understand how richly you're blessed because of Abraham? That's only in one way. In this next part, we're going to expound on how you're richly blessed because of Abraham.